Hi, David.
Hi, Sarah.
I think it would be really interesting to hear from you something about how you see energy, because I know that you see things that most of us don't see. I'd love to hear a bit about how you came to see it, or I think you probably could when you were a child, but it seems like it's developed a lot
Hmm.
over your life. And what is it that you actually see? What does it look like?
It's an
I want to get
ever-changing.
inside your world a little bit.
It is really it is a large story, but I need to go back probably a lot of years. So um, I can remember the first really, um, I guess, mind-blowing part was when I wasn't that old. I would have been about 5 or 6, and like I could feel energy, but it was just there. It didn't really hit on me. But I remember the first time I went to my grandmother's house, and my my parents were playing cards with my grandparents, and she has used to have this what is like a big old Australian mansion. It was basically a what would you call it? Like an old. It used to be part of a homestead. Okay, so it used to be like the centre part of a lot of community, larger community, and this was a huge house. But I was in the lounge room and just sleeping, and I woke up with quite a start, and I could see this ghost just sort of walking around, and it sort of it didn't even phase me whatsoever. And it's like the ghost got a bigger shock than I did. And it was really strange because I just sort of pointed and I said, "That's where you got to go." And they just turned to me and said, "Oh, thank you," more or less. And then they were gone. I didn't tell my parents because somehow that um, perhaps um, people aren't really going. They're not. They're not. You know that they're not open to it. Yeah, but I must have talked about it a lot because my parents said, "Oh, we always thought you were going to be a priest." Because when you're young, you used to talk about God and this and that, and I'm thinking, yeah, but it wouldn't have been talking about what you think is God or whatever, because it would have been completely different. Because my version and their version really, because I wasn't talking in a religious, wouldn't have been talking in a religious term. It would have been just God energy. You know what I mean? It's just like whatever. So, but as I progressed, and I can remember walking around um, the house when someone was sick. I'd go outside and I'd walk, and I can remember walking and just saying what I now call a flowing prayer, and it was like I now connect to help whoever it was, and then I'd just go through and do what is like this flowing prayer, so that the energy basically went to that person to heal them. And I remember doing that for years, and then
And
um,
that just came to you completely
yeah,
naturally.
yeah, naturally, like it wasn't just. It's not something I had to go and discover. It just, I mean, it was there, and I just did it. I never told anybody I did it because you just know. No one's really open to you discussing it, and they would have thought you were pretty damn weird, and that's to say the least. So then I used to play with energy a little bit early in the morning, and
What does that mean? What did that mean for you playing with energy?
playing with energy. It's funny. It's sort of like it's in your hands, and you could just feel it. Well, not so much see it so much, but you could feel it,
Yeah.
and you were just really playing with your own energy more than anything else. And basically, I guess that's how I really developed into, because when you do that, your intuition and instinct, you're playing with your own spirit energy. And so when you're playing with your own spirit energy, it tells you more what is really true about yourself, and it gives you that direction. You don't follow everything of everybody else, but still at the same time, you know that you're getting a completely different version of what's going on in the world than everybody else. It's and that's also very important for highly sensitive people, because you're if most people can probably think back and think there'd be times where you felt not so much ostracized, but you feel like you're a little bit out there. You know that you don't sort of fit in for some reason,
Or you just
but
feel different. Huh?
you just feel different, and you're getting different information than what everybody else is getting. And I often found it easier to talk to older people because their energy wasn't quite so chaotic quite often, because kids' energy sometimes can be very chaotic, and it's sort of flopping all around the place. And I know when I was growing up, I often played with older kids all the time because their energy wasn't quite so chaotic, and was just they were just I guess they were easier to be around.
And
So
were you very aware of energy through your teenage years?
um, sort of, but I must admit, as I got to around 15 or 16, I shut it off quite a lot. Probably because you're pretty when you're 15 or 16, you're pretty damn busy. You're so busy with all your different types of sport, and you're really busy with like homework and all the things that are going on at school. You're
And those things also are not, they tend to damp down the subtle energy anyway, don't they?
yeah,
Like very,
they do,
very
they
strong
do,
physical stuff and very
they do,
strong
and
mental.
you're the only thing that really stands out is sometimes when you're in classes and you're very aware that sometimes you're drawing in different information sometimes than what other people are drawing in. Um, and you can't go back now, but that's why I love helping kids now because otherwise other kids can really sort of overpower what you're trying to interpret, and then you can sort of really easily pick up what's what you need to, because otherwise tests can really shut you down really easily because of the intensity. Yeah,
Yeah.
especially when I was at in primary school, because when I was in primary school we had incredibly large classes. Sometimes I remember one was nearly 50 to 60 kids. That was ridiculous. And that intensity, it used to shut you down a lot. And I remember how free I felt as soon as I left high school, and like when I went to college. And because my first job was as a chef, and we were always going to college, and I thought, wow, this is so easy. I can just learn anything, and just like that. And because the classes weren't as large, and I guess it was something I was interested in, but I knew the energy was so different, and I thought, wow, this is so free. I couldn't believe how different it was, and that's how I've helped a few kids as well, because otherwise they don't feel free to use their problem solving skills, because you go to the same problem solving skills as what other kids do, and that's basically because you shut down your spirit.
Yeah.
And your spirit is, as I've mentioned, so very clearly responsible for giving your life direction, but um, also it can it can seem a little bit much sometimes. And unfortunately, I did close it down for a while, and because I was starting to get information that I really didn't want, because I didn't really want to get information about when friends' parents were passing to the other side, and or when someone was really sick and no one even really realized that they were sick.
So did you receive that information more like it was almost like something that you just knew, or would you see
No,
shifts in their energy? I'm
yeah.
really interested in how you experience this, because I think a lot of people, it's helpful to
Well,
learn the different
yeah,
languages that we have.
during the day, um, you walk around and you scan. Everybody scans. And then as it comes to nighttime, then you'll sort of regurgitate all the information that you've scanned during the day. So that's why we do lots and lots of exercises so that people recognize that every single person scans. And um, that basically means that we're very apt at picking up what is going on in ourselves, but because of physical energy, it's more about everybody else. So for anybody who is highly sensitive, if you've ever gone up and down your body and then all of a sudden put your hands out, you'll generally feel um, it's like all these little lines or tingles all over your hands. So it's, when I look at them, it's a bit like if you imagine coaxial cable coming at you, right around you everywhere, and it's a bit like getting all these messages. Like there's, like in your hand here, there'd be thousands of messages right there because there's so much information coming in, and as you go like this, you're picking up information that basically has nothing to do with you a lot of the time. So that's why you've got to learn how to basically find your own self-truth. And the only way you can find your own self-truth is basically by using your spirit, because your spirit does tell your consciousness what it needs and what it doesn't need.
So
Because it's,
I'd like to do a whole recording sometime about the spirit and how it works. And I'm still curious in terms of your personal experience and how this ability to see energy developed. Because so far, what I'm
well,
hearing mostly is that you knew things, but you weren't really seeing so much yet.
yeah,
So that
well,
must have developed over
sometimes, yeah, sometimes I saw on and off,
time.
but that was that was when I just had a lot of quiet time, and I could see things quite easily. But really, the trouble is, I mean, my mother was quite psychic, so she always somehow knew when I was quiet, and she'd just leave me alone and just let me explore. So, but Dad was always more. He was always about like the physical stuff. You got to get this done. You got to get that done. You know, his is a very physical world. You know, and Mum always knew because obviously she went through a lot of the same things. But her clairvoyance basically scared the hell out of her, whereas it didn't scare the hell out of me. It was just, and there's a lot of people it does scare because it's so different. I mean, it's not like you're getting voices going on in your head. You're getting um, information that comes through your body, and then it's like your intuition knows. But when I did turn off for quite some time, I did know that I was channeling completely wrongly. And because I did get voices in my head, basically, and I knew I was channeling completely wrong, because when you do that, that's like getting information just through your head. And that's how I help so many mediums and clairvoyants who can't turn off, and how to clear up their channels. Because if you're just getting information through your head, then it's more of what is around you and energy that has sort of not transitioned properly to the other side, basically.
So
Uh,
you're not getting the
uh,
pure messages somehow.
you're
You're
not
actually getting
you're not
bits and
yeah,
pieces and leftovers and remains and stuff.
yeah, you are. And that
Oh.
and that is the junk, and everybody can basically get that. And sometimes that's why people have trouble sleeping, because in a way they're channeling all this junk and they can't differentiate which is which. So I um when I was very fed up with it and I was totally pissed off, and I said, look, I just need self-truth. That's all I need. If I'm going to do this, I just need self-truth. And I really spat the dummy. And that was more or less when I changed the way I used my energy quite a lot. And they showed me how to interpret again back through my whole spirit body and all the information that comes through my spirit body first. And then it was really easy to find what is real and what isn't real. But I'd be driving along, and it's really easy because sometimes you can see energy just as you're driving along. And before I learned how to use just my spirit body, like I'd be driving along and I'd be seeing all sorts of weird and wonderful things, like there'd be there'd be colored grids that I've learned are just physical grids that are in the world. And that's why I think it's very important when we learn about energy. Not all energy is just good energy, because you can have physical based energy, which is really loud. It's very intrusive, and it can actually be still not dark energy, because everybody thinks that negative energy is all dark. Yeah, but it won't be, because negative energy is feeding on something. It's feeding on somewhere, which means it's getting energy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that it's always, it may be cloudy, but it's it can be either normal physical and negative energy, which is over negative, can be still quite bright, because it's feeding on different energy grids, and it can be quite bright. And it took me quite a while to differentiate between what was just physical energy, which is just junk, really. And that's how donkeys years ago I learned how to find, because I just learnt to focus through my spirit, and then I found all the subtle energy, and I basically learned how to reflect and refract what is just basically my own energy and my own consciousness and my own spirit. So it's very, very subtle. And that's the thing. Physical energy.
Can I go back a little bit? I'm really curious
Yeah.
about this.
Yeah.
When you
Sorry.
say I found all this subtle energy,
Yep.
what does that mean? How do you how did you find it? How did you know that these are grids and these are physical grids, and then I found this subtle energy? Like, what does that mean? What does it look like?
Well, after I spat the dummy, I sort of got a couple of guides who I found just sent me more information that was freeing. And after that, then every day it was more or less, it's like you're in school. You're getting a new, you're getting it, you're getting a new message every day, but you're learning. Every day is sort of like a learning message. And what I started with, what they called was the basic foundations of humanity that everyone's missing.
So they were just literally teaching you.
They were just basically teaching me, and it was like going back to grade one, if you like, and you had to relearn absolutely everything all over again. And it was really frustrating, because I used to be able to do all this stuff and see all this stuff and do it naturally, and it was just, I couldn't do it anymore. And it really, really pissed me off. But to to have to go back, it's a bit like learning to walk again. And I could understand what it must be like for people who've had to learn to walk or talk again, because basically this is what I had to do. I had to learn to walk and talk again, basically, because I was so debilitated that
because the way you were using energy before was just like too free and too wild and not enough understanding.
Yeah, because 1 minute I'm doing it, but then when I stopped and I started to channel all this junk from all this energy that was not passed over, and then you find all this physical energy, and then when you get back into it, you start to feel the energy and you got all excited. Oh, I'm back. But, and that's what happens to a lot of people when they're first introduced to energy or energy healing and all that sort of stuff. And everybody thinks that, ah, you can feel they're getting really excited, but I'm sorry, but that's crap. Because
Well,
what you're
it's
feeling
actually
is,
really interesting for me hearing your story and having been present while you're teaching so many people and being part of it. And
yeah,
many of them are my clients. And a lot of things start to make sense when I hear your story, because it shows how you came to this, having so much confidence in knowing how people are channeling and what they're picking up, and that what they're picking up isn't nearly as exciting as they think it is,
yeah.
and how to build these really basic foundations so that we're not missing the fundamentals of who we are. And that's so much the essence of your work. So it's actually very fascinating to put it in the context of your personal story.
See, on that context, one of the biggest things is that we all miss is, and that everyone gets caught up in the, oh, this is really important. It's like you're trying to find the answers to everything, but you're trying what you find you need and what you find you don't need are equally important. And that's the biggest thing, because I find when most people are in this work, they just keep um, basically devouring everything that you find. Yeah. But you're not, it's when you find something that you don't need, sometimes it is even more important than what you do need. Because as soon as you find something that you don't need, it's like breaking a habit, or it's like breaking a pattern. And when you cut off little bits of interference, then all of a sudden what you can actually receive is greater. Because if we're just focusing on what we can receive, it is never going to get larger until you can actually, because I'll put it this way, it's a bit like, imagine yourself as a cupboard. As soon as you make room for something else and what you don't do, then automatically you've got room to actually bring on and do something and receive something, because you cannot receive while you're full.
Yeah.
So you've got to make room all the time to make room for what is needed. Yeah. And
So
that's
how
what
did you learn that?
I guess it may have been sheer ass or lucky, but I think probably because of the work I did previously in helping when somebody was sick, and I did a lot of those same healings again when I started to get confidence back again, and I found there's a lot of stuff I don't need because it was so hard, and that's when, and as soon as I started using the subtle energy again, it's like, oh, now I'm home, because my spirit told me straight away, this is what you need. That harsh shit isn't what you need. And then I spent a lot of time, and early in the morning I'd scan myself for hours, and that's how I started to find all the really good stuff, because
And
otherwise,
did your guides ask you to scan yourself like that, or was that just something
no,
you did
no,
because you were fascinated?
it was just intuition. But what they did tell me was, Dave, make sure you, no matter what you do, you question everything, because the answer isn't the important part, it's the questions. Because when you question something, you open up all these different senses that we have. Because if you're just going from to try and find the answer, you find a very limited type of proposition to how something needs to be fixed or not fixed, and then we don't get the whole real answer. Because as you start to ask all these questions, you start to decipher, and you start to go through all these things. So imagine there's all these answers straight in front of you, yeah? So one of the biggest things I've found, and this is quite huge, is because everyone tells us that no matter what the answer is deep inside us. Yeah. But I found that that's not completely true. The reason it's not completely true is I found that we all split. So when just through a tiny bit of stress or something that's going on in our life that is trying to get a forceful outcome, or like going back even to it like school, you're quite happy to get a certain outcome, but then you've got other people putting all this pressure on you, yeah? So when you feel that, that's when you start to shut down. So you'll push energy or consciousness and spirit way deep inside you, and then it splits. As soon as you push something down deep inside you, you're trying to protect it, right? But as soon as you do that, it splits, which means that a whole part will then sit outside. So it'll split 50-50.
It's like so you feel separated from yourself.
Yeah, you are. That's what, and the biggest thing is, if you can imagine, and it took me a long time to find that, but as soon as I found it, it was like, holy shit, no wonder everything doesn't work. And then I started to find little bits and pieces of my consciousness and spirit that was sitting outside here, and I thought, wow, I couldn't believe it. It was like, because as everyone can imagine, if there's little, it doesn't have to be much, right? A little bit of your spirit, because your spirit is the basis of how you sense everything. Everything. It is the biggest undervalued thing. And like, everyone's trying to go on feelings and emotions. Well, that's the worst thing we can ever do, because they're just linked into physical shit. Okay? All the crap that's going on. As soon as we learn how to sense, man, that is like, wow. Now everything's opening up. And what do you do when you sense? You find self-truth.
Yeah, and it's funny because when you sense, you actually it's a very non-emotional experience. Emotions just cover over the sensing.
I mean, there are times when you've found something that is so incredible, and you could almost run down the road and think, wow, I found all this, but nobody else will get it. And that's why it's really good fun talking to highly sensitive people, because as soon as you start talking to somebody about something and you start showing them something, it's like you see the lights going on and they're really damn excited because you're talking the same language.
Yeah.
And your senses are the liberating part that tell you what the hell is really going on, because as soon as you meet somebody for the first time, we know what that person's like because we all scan.
But highly sensitive people can read the information much more effectively.
Yeah,
it's interesting what you were saying about the question thing, because I realized that for the last few years at least, and I can't remember how far it goes back, I often feel like I'm a walking question. I always have questions that are kind of unfolding within me, and I walk around with this sort of open senses, just like you described, because the answers that come most quickly are not always the best answer. People always say, oh, just take the first answer. But I've found I need to sense with all of my being to find an answer that is multidimensional, that is rich and provides a much fuller solution than this kind of instant, quick, intuitive answer. So it's a very interesting and different experience.
It does help you see a greater logic, because I know I'd often go to, when you start using your senses, like even when I was a chef, you can sense what all goes together. You didn't even need to taste it. Well, you had to, but you know what I mean. Every time you did, you were pretty damn close. You might have to adjust a little bit, things here or there, but you could. And there's a lot of people who are really in tune with their essences and elements of what's in and around them. And It's why people love go hugging trees, or if you're highly sensitive, it's a good idea even to just, if you put your hand just over flowers and you just feel it. You can feel the energy come off. I mean, everybody should just go out in the garden and feel all the plants, but then start to differentiate. Start to go to the plants that are in your area. In fact, walk in the bush. That's where you should really walk. And once you
And
turn,
to translate that for other countries, like walk in the
so
forest, walk in the
walk in the
woods, walk in
forest,
the...
yeah, walk in the, but find, but find, but find the flowers and the trees that are flowering, and sometimes the tiniest, it is strange. You can be walking almost through a bog sometimes, and you can find this one little flower that's up there, and you go down there and you put your hand there, and it's like someone's put 240 volts through you. There is so much power in some small little flower, and that's basically why that's how, herbs and all that began.
Herbs,
Like
flower
flowers,
essences, all of those
flower
things.
essences, all
Yeah.
the oils and all that sort of thing. And after you learn, because sometimes people think, sometimes more of all sorts of oils and everything else is better, but sometimes it's not.
And just
Sometimes,
pick up the energy directly.
yeah, well, you can, and you can
Yeah.
pick up the energy directly, but that's how we make tinctures and all that sort of thing. And
Yeah.
it was something because my sister used to use um, Australian bushflower essences, and some of them are incredibly powerful. And then she seemed to have some. Um, she was a bit annoyed with me, and I said, well, we'll use this, this, and this. And she said, how do you pick that up? And I said, well, your intuition tells you. So she'd do her. She said, oh, you're a smart ass.
Pendulum.
But yeah, pendulum, but it's basically your intuition picks up what is needed and what isn't needed, and it also tells you that also some things can be used for different things,
Yeah.
than what is the normal. So
So
that's
there's a whole lot of stuff that you learned and explored that. I want to come back just a little bit more about you before we finish this one, because there's so much interesting stuff here, but we need to do whole recordings about each topic, really. But I'm
yeah,
really
so
curious now about, after all these years of experience and learning and being taught and exploring and all the things that you've talked about, it seems that now you have a perception of energy that's very, very rich, very specific and precise. And I'm curious, what's that like? What can you describe it to us? I'm sorry to be so probing, but I think it's genuinely interesting thing.
it is so incredibly freeing, and because I know how much, when you just go into physical energy, it can make so much chaos. Your head is so busy. You're also very prone to anxiety. You're prone to always picking up other people's perceptions over your own. It is so bloody liberating to just be able to go stand in front of 3,000 people and talk about something that is so valuable. It's so freeing for people. And that even though that sometimes you're talking to a lot of people who English isn't their first language, that as soon as we start talking energy and we start talking conscious, we start talking spirit, everybody gets it. It's like because it is a universal language. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And
It
also, because when
shows,
you talk about it, there's a transmission of what you're talking about. So even if they don't understand the words, they get
yeah,
the energy of it directly because you're talking about it. And
that's right. And And we learn about a lot of things that a lot of people would just love to use, like your telepathy. I remember the first time I was really using telepathy to pass on to other people what was going on. And I knew that these people were getting like download up. It's like I just plugged in. It's like I'm a computer and I just plugged in to these people. And it's like all this information that I'd learned of what you need and what you don't need was just going straight through. And these people I'd known for probably 15, 20 years. So I could tell by their faces. And I said, you can tell that, can't you? And they said, they were really surprised. I said, yeah, it's just telepathic, isn't it? And I said, isn't that good shit? I said, there's so much information because you couldn't talk. You can't tell somebody enough information
Because the
because
words are too limited. They can't
the, word,
describe people.
the words are too limited.
Yeah.
And there is so much information. It's like passing on encyclopedias of information straight away. And you see people transition so quickly, but everybody nonetheless still needs to learn all these basic foundations. But you can tell just by their senses and everything that's going on with them that automatically you know that they're changing that person's life because there's all these basic things. And when they turn on and when I know that there's a lot of things that people are going through, a lot of pain, a lot of anguish, because they got all this information that's coming in and that has nothing to do with them.
Yeah.
And as soon as you turn that off, you become so quiet. And it is strange because we're all used to being so over busy about everybody else, because we've got to remember that we're actually, everybody thinks that we're quite a simple body. We're not. We're incredibly complex. But when you use that complex body, there's a simplicity about it that becomes, it's like you've got information coming in that's needed and sieving through and deleting all the information that's not needed. And that's an incredible gift when it's transformed, because it just makes life easy. And I don't think I like, and there's a lot of ways that we're helping a lot of different types of humanity and people just by being able to pass it on. And
Yeah, and
then
then other
other,
people will
other
pass it
people
on.
help others. Yeah.
They pass it on, and many people don't even know what they're passing on, but it's
Yeah.
still.
And I've seen it with friends. I know when um, I've seen friends just talking to other people, and I said, well, boy, you helped that person. And I said, what do you mean? And I said, you really helped that person then. And I said, well, they said, but I was just talking to them. I said, yeah, that's right, you were.
There's
But
talking and there's talking, isn't there?
there's talking and there's talking because your spirit and your consciousness is basically talking to others, and then it's like you're teaching somebody else to get a vast conversation of self.
Well, that's another topic that I'd love to come to talk more about energy transmission, how energy gets shared between people, and because I think that's a really fascinating area that isn't talked about very much
It's not.
anywhere.
Everybody is affected by everybody, and everybody is affected by everything. And like,
Yeah, and what's the implications of that? Because it's once you know more about it, it makes you actually much more conscious yourself about how you communicate and how you think and feel about things.
it does.
It's actually a very uplifting thing to be aware of.
And on that's basically why I developed how just to help people. We call it grounding, but it's not really just grounding. It's activated grounding, and it's teaching people to be aware of their own energy so that they can become just a little bit independent, even without doing all the basics. But then once you learn the basics, that grounding just becomes incredibly strong, and you become strong in your own right, because
Well, we
you're not,
will.
yeah.
Yeah, I've taught many people your grounding, and you've taught many people your grounding, and it's changed their lives. And we've also been teaching people the basics. And on YouTube, I'll actually post a link under this video so that we can start to share some information about how people can find out more. I think it's very fascinating to get this insight into your journey and how that's turned into the things that you teach, because I think people can relate to these different ways of experiencing life and different ways of sensing, and it's so rare that it's talked about in public. So just to be able to talk about it and share and say, oh, well, I experienced it like that, there are things you're describing, and I realized, oh, I would describe it slightly different, but some of it's the same experience or very similar experience, but I never thought of it being the same. So it's when we talk about it, we discover.
And it's really interesting when we've done our courses, Sarah, isn't it? When we have question and answer time, and everybody's asking all these very pertinent questions, because it doesn't matter what it is. Everybody, I mean, when you've learnt so much, it's like that old saying, you've forgotten more than what you know. So, but it's not that you've forgotten it. It's just that you're trying to cover pertinent areas, and there's a lot of subconscious areas that we go to later. But sometimes some people have been, because they've been trying to find their way for quite a while, they've already turned on some little bits here and there, and everyone's tweaked just a little bit differently. But that's what's really fun about when we do whole groups, because everybody helps each other.
Yes, it starts to
It's
and it
beautiful to
connects
see.
everything up together
Yeah,
again.
where
Really nice.
people aren't very strong in some area, and we'll talk about that a bit more.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, David, and thank you for sharing your story. It's given me a lot of insight, actually. And yes, and I think that will be really helpful. And we'll come back and explore in more depth some of the topics that we've raised here.
Thanks, Sarah.